papers, what have you, official proceedings, court documents. And what I found out was that the history of Black Freemasonry in this region had been totally erased and whitewashed by the published histories of later authors. And in my research, I was able to figure out some reasons why I think that's the case.
Did you ever figure out who had whitewashed this history intentionally?
Yes.
Okay.
The man who did that was a guy by the name of
Justin and shit like that. And yeah, that's about it. So my voice is fucked up. I had a whole episode last night in my sleep. All right, so 3, 2, 1.
Hey, what's up, guys? Welcome back to another episode of Mental Health Monday here with my boy James. James, what up, man?
Hey, how's everybody doing? What's going on?
Hey. So introduce yourself to the folks. Let them know who you are, what it is that you do.
My name is James R. Morgan III. I am an author, a historian. My new line, I'm a professional intellectual, and I am just really glad to be here on Mental Health Monday.
Okay. So tell folks about the book that you wrote.
Sure. So the title of my book is The Lost Empire, Black Freemasonry in the Old West.
A little bit. All right, no problem. Yeah. That's you.
So it's The Lost Empire, Black Freemasonry in the Old West, 1867 to 1906.
Yeah.
I published this book in 2018. It was the winner of 3 major awards: the Dr. Charles H. Wesley Medal of History, the Phillips Whitney Book Award, as well as an award from the African American Historical and Genealogical Society.
Okay.
So I'm very proud of it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is that my signed copy?
You don't have a copy?
No, remember I was like, this is my signed copy.
It's my personal copy. I got you.
All right, cool. All right, we're not judging.
I got you. This one's dirty.
No, I got you. That one got notes in it.
Yeah.
That might be a better copy. Anyway, so, all right, so tell me the value of this book and why was it important for you to write this book?
Sure. So, The Lost Empire is a book that discusses the history of African American Freemasonry in the Wild West. And a lot of times when you say the Wild West, people just think of Texas. However, the book primarily focuses on Kansas, but then kind of emanates out from there. So it does get to Texas, but also you're going to Nebraska, Colorado, that whole kind of Tornado Valley region. And it really focuses.
What's the Tornado Valley?
Tornado Valley is the Tornado Alley is like the Midwestern part of the country. That's where they have like the most tornadoes. So that's kind of a term they use. But it focuses on this man right here on the cover, Captain William D. Matthews, who really was a pioneer for this particular organization. I am a Freemason as well. I'm the Grand Historian for the Most Worshipful Prince Hall Grand Lodge of the District of Columbia. And I'm a past master of my lodge. I'm very active in that world. And essentially what happened was in 2014, I was contacted by my co-researcher, Ms. Tanisha Swanigan. Her name is on the book as well. Shout out to her. She was the great-grandniece of Senator Blanche Kelso Bruce.
Okay.
Senator Bruce was the first African-American to serve a full term in Congress during the Reconstruction period. She had a newspaper article that she had found about one of his brothers whose name was Henry C. Bruce. Henry Bruce was, in 1869, was in a position called the Grand Lecturer, which is something we still have today in Freemasonry. He was the Grand Lecturer for the Black Masons in Kansas at the time. And one night while he was on his way home, he gets shot by a mixed race man by the name of Alan Pinks. He took 2 bullets to the chest. And Captain William Matthews, who was the Grand Master of the state at this time, him and a posse of brothers, they found this guy. He was in sheriff's custody at the time, and they gunned him down in broad daylight. Ms. Swanigan gave me this article and was trying to find out more information about these people and what was going on. And what happened was that as I started to research it, I was trying to compare, as historians, we look at sources and what's been published, what's out there. The things that she gave me didn't add up with the stuff that was already published on Freemasonry, on Black Freemasonry in this region. And so
would you say you found some gaps in history?
Major gaps, major gaps, just areas where things just weren't adding up. And so what I basically did, I didn't really plan to do this, but what I did was try to get to the most primary sources as possible. Newspapers, what have you. official proceedings, court documents. And what I found out was that the history of Black Freemasonry in this region had been totally erased and whitewashed
Okay.
by the published histories of later authors. And in my research, I was able to figure out some reasons why I think that's the case.
Did you ever figure out who had whitewashed this history intentionally?
Yes.
Okay.
The man who did that was a guy by the name of William H. Grimshaw, was the primary culprit. He actually was a Grand Master here in D.C., so he's a member of the same Grand Lodge that I'm a member of. He published his book in 1903. He published a history that really kind of rewrote the history of the 1800s.
You hit his family up about that or not really?
I haven't found any living descendants of his.
Okay.
I don't remember if I've ever actually looked, but he was a Grand Master of the same Grand Lodge that I'm a member of.
Yeah.
Which is kind of interesting. And if you get a copy of his book, which he publishes again in 1903, it's called The Official History of Freemasonry Among Colored People. That book for the first half of the 20th century was kind of looked at as the authoritative text on the history of African American Freemasons.
Yeah.
In the second half of the 20th century, people like Dr. Charles H. Wesley, Joseph Walks, and a number of others began going back and saying, no, that book isn't really something we should be dealing with, because they realized what he had done. I'm proud to say that I'm a person that really kind of took it, as far as at least when it comes to Kansas and the Wild West, I really, really dived into that story and figured out what he wrote was totally false, and I think was also trying to save the reputation of a man by the name of Richard Howell Gleaves, who was a very prominent Masonic figure in the 1800s, in the early 1900s.
He Black?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. All these people, most of the people I'm talking about in the book are Black.
Yeah.
And I began to realize that the truth sometimes is actually stranger than the fiction.
Okay. Tell me more about that.
So the story that existed before I wrote my book was essentially that Kansas, that there was a Grand Lodge started in Kansas of Black Masons. I forget what year Grimshaw says, but I know the year was wrong. And that Grand Lodge basically flowed into the Prince Hall Grand Lodge of Kansas, which exists still to this day.
Yeah.
What I found out was that there were actually two Black Grand Lodges in the history of that state, that both claim lineage back to Prince Hall. And if anyone is not familiar with Prince Hall, he was an abolitionist during the Revolutionary War period, who kind of started the African American Masonic movement, chartered the first lodge, African Lodge 459, in the city of Boston. So there are two Black Grand Lodges in the history of Kansas, and my book covers the history of the first one under William Matthews.
Okay.
Matthews himself, I think he really brings the story to life, and it was an honor to kind of tell the story. Matthews' life is like something out of a movie. I mean, this guy was a gunslinger. He was a politician. He was the Grand Master for the Masons. He was also an agent for the Underground Railroad. He traveled quite a bit.
How are you able to discover all this history in terms of things that he's a part of? Like, legally, were these documents written down, or were there certain stories that were passed down through word of mouth and you just had to like reach out to people to get them?
I think one of the biggest miracles of the book is that most of my sources were fresh out of the newspaper.
The newspaper?
Yeah, fresh out of the newspaper.
So these things were published in the newspaper, including like being a part of the Underground Railroad.
Oh yeah, absolutely. The Underground Railroad part, of course, wasn't published necessarily during slavery was of course, but after years. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. I've never thought that, like, when it came to the Underground Railroad, from what we learned in school, because you and I went to high school together.
Right.
I always pictured it as anybody who was a part of that time was passed down through word of mouth. And for anonymity,
anonymity.
Yeah. And for that purposes of people not know who you are, your families, people wouldn't want people to know who was involved. Harriet was the forefront, and they're more the background of like, hey, we're getting it done. Right.
And that's one of the things that I love about being a historian of the Black experience, is that we get to dissect those type of assumptions, because there is some truth to what you just said, but there are also written records.
Yeah.
So a lot of people may or may not be familiar with William Still, who lived in Philadelphia. William Still essentially was a record keeper for the Underground Railroad. But whereas many other people who in his position would have burned their records or maybe not even taken records, we were still kept a log of passengers that arrived in Philadelphia. A lot of times these people sometimes would change their names, and he would actually annotate, okay, well, what's your name now? And the people said, well, no, but my mother's name was this, or my first master's name was that, my father's name was that. So sometimes people would change their names for whatever reason. And he would annotate that. And so it's because of William Still's records. He was also a Freemason, by the way. It's because of his records that people are able to kind of go back and get at least an idea of the Philadelphia aspect of the Underground Railroad.
Okay.
So yeah.
I hear you bring up Freemason probably 3 different times in this combo, right? What exactly is the responsibility of a Freemason?
Man, the responsibility of a Freemason, I think, is to be the best man that he can be. As Masons, we are taught to keep God at the center of our lives, and it's not a religion, it's not a cult, we're not devil worshiping, people taking over the world, or that.
All the things the media spun.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's about holding ourselves accountable as men and keeping, God in the center of our lives. And in doing that, we're supposed to carry that off into our marriages, into our relationships with our friends and our children and the community around us, being charitable or what have you.
Yeah.
But for me, it's about a self-accountability when it comes to spirituality or what have you. And I think at the time, now when we put this back into an African-American context, in the context of pre-Civil War years, one of the things I think that a lot of those brothers of that time period saw was, hey, look, if I'm a black man and I'm free, that's great for me, but I need to help my other people get free. So that's why most of the lodges that you'll see from the time period would have served, if they had the space or someone had a house or something, these brothers were working on the railroad by and large.
Is that why these lodges are numbered?
Well, the lodges are numbered from an organizational perspective of which one is the oldest in a given state or what have you.
Yeah.
But think about that infrastructure, right? Masonry having a lodge that demands some kind of privacy, networking, secret signs that I'm not going to tell you all about. All these type of things that are a way that are invisible to those who are outsiders, right? But is a way for us at the time to help brothers and sisters from the South get north, or in some cases from the South to go further south to go other places, right? So the fact that this history was available, and that Matthew's life and the history of his Grand Lodge, which was called the King Solomon Grand Lodge of Kansas, the fact that there was so much material available that just people had ignored for years. And so I'm just honored to say that I was able to slowly but surely piece the narrative together, and now you all can read it.
Do you look forward to being a part of history, or do you more so look forward to correcting history and just having the right piece of information out there?
Oh man, I'd be a liar if I didn't say both. I look forward to being a part of history in terms of, it feels good to know that I have done something that will outlive me. Yeah. Right? If I die today, this book will still be available. People will still be able to read it. And there's a piece of me in every copy of the book that, is out there. Because that was time, effort. There's things about that book, there's, like any book, you can read the acknowledgments and stuff, but there's things from my soul, if you will, that I poured in there like any author does. Yeah. But then on the other hand, on the more, professional side, I absolutely enjoy helping to correct the historical narrative, or in some cases reaffirming it, because I say the truth shall set you free. I know it's kind of cliche.
Is there truth there?
Exactly. There's truth there. There really is. The problem is we're under so many spells of falsehood that we are not free as a people. And I'm not just talking about black people. I'm talking about the world at large, because we're being taught taught the wrong things and misled in the wrong direction. But because I keep, God at the center of my life, right? And I try to be as accurate as possible with this history I'm telling, because growing up, a lot of times, especially for black kids, we're taught very little of our history. Our history didn't matter. Our history begins with slavery, all these different things.
We were barely taught our history in high school when it comes to black people.
Exactly. And so Now the thing is,
You were AP history, right?
yes, I was.
Yeah.
Yes. But here's the funny thing: even during the years of slavery, which is, I think by all accounts, probably some of the worst, probably one of the worst atrocity, in history.
Yeah.
Even during those years, we didn't back down.
Mm-hmm.
Even during those years, you have heroes like a Captain William Matthews or Prince Hall or Senator Bruce or whoever.
People that are necessary.
People that are necessary.
Yeah.
And for me, I think it's important. That's why when you asked me to come in and talk with you, I said yes, because I really believe that the historical narrative that we have about ourselves plays into our mental health.
Yeah. Tell me more.
So what I mean by that is, if you look at how certain other cultures view themselves, even on an individual basis, right? What is the importance of a last name?
Mm-hmm.
My name links me to a history of my family, which links me back to a dynasty somewhere or to a family root, some farm. Even if it's just a family farm, it might not be royalty, but even if it's just a family farm somewhere. But darn it, that's my name.
Mm-hmm.
That's
that's my receipt.
Exactly, it's my receipt. Exactly. For a lot of us as people, especially in the African diaspora, we're not taught that.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why we're not taught that is because once we know it, we can never be slaves again.
Yeah.
We can't be manipulated by certain mechanisms in society or what have you, that will allow us to fall into certain traps
Yeah.
that force us back on a plantation. And by the plantation today, I mean the modern prison system, right? You move differently because you know better,
Yeah.
because you have a certain level of self-respect for yourself and even for others around you.
Mm-hmm.
So it changes how you talk, changes how you walk, changes how you live, how you eat, because you now know that, I don't have to do this. Even if the TV, has a lot of negative images of people that look like me, I don't have to live in that way. And guess what? It's actually not, we got to get out of this mentality of, and I heard this growing up, you go to school, you're reading something that, you speaking proper English.
Yeah.
Oh, well, you acting white. You're not black. We got to get out of that.
Yeah.
Because while my mentality is, I hate the English language. I hate how it got into my mouth, but I'm going to use it to tell my stories.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And whatever side I choose represents who I am regardless.
Right. And right. And even when we think about how our kids are socialized around education, Black people built the pyramids. And I've actually been to Egypt. Black people built the pyramids. Black people built the Sphinx. These are things that by modern technology, with all of the computers of today,
we accomplished.
We accomplished it, but
Yeah.
people still can't figure out how we accomplished it.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. When you go to the Temple of Abu Simbel, which is in southern Egypt, right there on the Sudanese border,
Yeah.
Pharaoh Isis II, he actually built a temple into the mountainside, right? And when you go inside there, you go all the way back straight through to the area called the Holy of Holies, where there's a statue of Ramesses sitting among the gods, right? The Egyptian pantheon.
Yeah.
He structured that statue, that temple in such a way that the sunlight would focus in on his face on his birthday.
Damn.
When they built, I think it's Lake Nasser over there, they built a dam. The temple was going to get flooded, so the government and some construction crews raised the temple up. They moved it, and they, by all the computers and everything, they still could not get that sunlight to shine on his face the way it used to.
Yeah.
When they did it back in ancient times.
They're missing the tools. They're missing information.
Missing tools, missing information. But think about the ingenuity, the education, the imagination, all of that. That those people had to have. So our
and the
kids,
history
and the
that
history
pours into that.
exactly.
Yeah.
So our kids need to know that that's their great grandfather and grandmother that did those type of things. And by the way, next to his temple is the temple of Nefertari, which was his favorite wife. Okay, so this is not just a male thing or a female thing. This is about the basic humanity of people in general, Black people specifically.
Yeah.
Knowing our history is very important, I think, to our personal ideas of self-worth. And for me as a genealogist, someone who researches family history for myself and for others, I can tell you researching my own family history changed my mentality.
Okay.
How I think about life. Well, one of the ways I would say is that I have a great grandfather whose name was Reverend William Jefferson Hightower. He built and pastored the very first AME church in the state of Alabama.
Okay.
By the time he was 36 years old, he was a trustee of an HBCU called Payne University, which no longer exists. But he was a trustee of the school.
Yeah.
Now, I'm 33. And now I'm saying, well, wait a minute. My ancestor was a trustee of a university at 36.
Got matched that.
Or exceeded.
Yeah.
But if you don't know that you have that in your background, you just, what's the standard?
Did he write a book?
Not to my knowledge. Not to my knowledge.
You good then.
Exactly. Well, yeah, exactly. But my point is that, you know, when you have the standard to meet, when you know that, okay, mom and dad did this, grandma and grandpa did that, it puts you on doesn't necessarily mean you have to do the same things that they did, but it does mean that there are some footsteps that you got to walk in.
Yeah.
And actually you got to take it. Now you got the torch, you got to take it farther. Now there's a lot of pressure, but the beautiful thing about life and the beautiful thing I think about history is that they did it. That's why you're sitting here.
Yeah.
So if they can accomplish it, you can accomplish it.
Yeah.
So when we think about how just the basic self-talk, I mean, even something simple as whether it's going to college, whether it's something simple as, you know, just getting up in the morning and feeling refreshed and moving forward regardless of whatever happened yesterday. Yeah. It all goes back to the stories that we tell ourselves about the past.
So your family has done an amazing job, from my knowledge, of looking into their own history, right? What's the importance of history to your family directly, and why are they so thirsty for who they may have been and where their trees and branches may extend?
That's a good question. I wish I felt like it was important to everybody in my family, but I would say, in general, I kind of got the family history book from my mom's side more so. But
so your family already had a family history book?
Not a book, but I like to say that, you know, I've come to realize that both of my mother's parents, in their own way, kind of come through that kind of like griot tradition of Africa, meaning that both of my mother's parents, you know, researched family history for slightly different reasons, but they both had done that, and I like to say that I think I inherited that from them. Okay. I think that on a very, very practical level, my mom's dad, you know, he inherited quite a bit of land and houses and things because other branches of the family didn't have children. So on a practical level, and then he also too, he was raised by his grandparents, his great-grandparents, so he knew a lot of these people as a child, but also he inherited material wealth, right, that he still owns to this day. So he has to know where this came from and this, that, and third. And I think that's one of the reasons why it was very important to him that he that he teach me, you know, where my ancestors are buried and who was who and what was what. And the story I just told you about the church with my ancestor, Reverend Hightower, my grandfather told me that story when I was 6 years old. Didn't think it was important back then. But as I matured, right, and then I'm at Howard University, and I get an assignment to research, to come back and talk about my family history. I didn't think any of my family did anything important. I was like, man, I remember I said, man, I come from some country Negroes from Alabama. I don't. But I remember that one story my grandfather told me. And I started researching it. And by this point, I'm in my 20s, and I now have the internet. I have access to books. I've already read a lot of things. And so now I'm piecing it together, and I'm going, oh my God. You know, as I, you know, kind of worked out the story, I figured out my ancestor rebuilt a church that had been burned down essentially by the Klan.
Okay. So that's how they fought back and kept the foundation.
Exactly. I'm finding out that, wait a minute, this particular church was built with bricks. No, the white man that owned the brickyard in town would not sell them any bricks, even though he had the money. So he organized the entire community together to get bricks from all over the place to contribute to the establishment of this new church building, which I had the pleasure of speaking at, I believe, about a month ago.
Was that a full circle moment for you?
Oh, very much so. Yeah, very much so. I mean,
yeah, and I know you've done a lot of traveling, so that was important.
But very much so. I mean, one of the first things I told them, I said, one of my first history lessons I can remember, I got on the front steps of this church, you know, and to be able to be in a space. Now I'm in a physical space that my ancestor built this.
Mm-hmm.
What do you mean I can't pass math?
Yeah. Yeah.
Even though I just struggled with math in school. but I bounced back though. I went to grad school and got a 4.0 all the way through my master's program. So,
Okay.
you know,
Yeah.
But my point is that think about the organizational capacity he had to have. Think about the ingenuity, the daring, just all that. Once I've really kind of swallowed that story for myself, who is somebody telling me, you know, not to vote or not to this, not to that? You know, my mental health tells me I'm going to be an active and engaged citizen. I come from a family of builders. I come from a family that's productive. I come from, you know, so I think in that regard, particularly with my mom's dad, that was important. And then also with my grandmother, I think that there is an aspect of that human connection as well.
More about that.
So I have a book at home that my grandmother wrote, you know, nothing like not published, but you know, just some notes that she put together for a family reunion of all of my cousins at the time. This is from a family reunion I think that she had organized in like 1992 or 1993.
She really cared.
Yeah. Back then, I mean, you know, internet and all that, but she wrote out who was who and whose children, you know.
But you said she had foresight?
Foresight in regards to what?
That people may want to know who's who and understand their history at some point.
You know, I never thought about it like that, but I like to think with it, maybe, you know, maybe. But, you know, again, for us to know who we are, you know, I come from my mom's side, I come from a very southern Alabama family.
Yeah.
And my grandmother, both my grandparents, in their lifetime, they would have seen the last bit of the Great Migration. So people leaving the South, going north. So I have cousins. So as you know, I'm from New Jersey. A lot of my family came to Jersey. I have some relatives that went to Ohio, some relatives that went to Chicago, some relatives that went to Michigan, like Detroit and Saginaw, Michigan. Right? So that dispersal that occurs is real, but let's remember where we come from. Regardless of where we go, remember where we come from. And so I think that's the importance of history is reminding us of where we came from.
Okay.
And who we come from.
Okay. Now, would you say in relation to mental health that there's value in standing up for yourself?
Oh, absolutely.
Because like I've heard you reference the history of your family doing little things like rebuilding the church, making sure there's a written history, understanding where you come from. And I feel like you've used that as a beacon of like, look, if they can do this and they had laws and whole communities that was working against them, why would I ever stop?
Right. Well, yeah, I think that is very important. You know, knowledge without works, right,
is dead.
Is dead. Same thing with faith. So to be able to say, okay, that I am a part of a lineage of people or in a fraternity or what have you, that's great. But the question is, what are you going to do with it? Yeah. Okay. So, I think it's important. That's why I think it's important to be a member of different organizations, particularly historically Black ones, but also to know your family history because it reminds you of that obligation that you have. Yeah. Okay. So I was actually, and I don't do this very often, but I was actually for the museum that I work for. I was at a worship service that we had the other day, and there was a pastor, it was actually a local pastor from over here in Alexandria. Yeah, and he was talking about the story of how the Jews leaving Egypt and whatnot, and had that whole the Moses story. And so I'm listening to him, and one thing he said that was interesting. He said that when you look in the Bible, there it talks about the story of Joseph. If anyone knows the story of Joseph, Joseph was supposed to be a Hebrew that came to Egypt and told the Pharaoh that there was going to be a famine, and this is what you need to do. And because of that, he was elevated to a high position. Right. Yeah. This is the story. Whether it's historically accurate or not, I'm not going to get into it. But this is the story. Now in the Bible, it talks about how years later there came a Pharaoh who knew not Joseph. Yeah. So what the pastor was saying, which I thought was really profound, was that there comes a time, if you don't teach your history properly, you end up with a generation of people who have privilege, because this Pharaoh is privileged at this point. But he doesn't know the sacrifice or the relationships, doesn't value what it took for him to be on the throne in his given day and time. And it leads him to make decisions that, in the story, it's like, he enslaves the Jews and this after, he leads him to make decisions because he doesn't know.
Yeah.
He doesn't know no better.
Yeah.
You got to know your history so you should know better. There's certain discussions and things that I see on the news and things. I'm like, we've already had these debates.
It's just they're trying to figure out ways for us to not have newer conversations.
Right. But also, too, there are people who know the history that are mad because they lost the last round. So they want to come back. So why are we talking about fighting for voting rights in the 21st century? That discussion should be over.
What do you think the newer discussion should be?
I think the newer discussions of today should definitely be around continuing the fight, the march forward as far as human rights is concerned, overall. I think, we live in a very digital world now and stuff, so there are definitely certain ethical questions that we need to be thinking about as technology moves society forward. It's great that we have these tools, but do we have the consciousness to utilize them to the best human benefit?
Yeah.
The environment, what have you. Those are some really big ideas, some really big questions that we need to be thinking about. But we're never going to get to those ideas if we're still fighting these racist, sexist ideas of the past.
Yeah.
Why are we still fighting about voting rights? To me, it just doesn't make sense.
Yeah. Now, I think it does make sense when that comes up because they're trying to take away people's voting rights or they're trying to change laws of that. But outside of that, it's like, if you don't progress the conversation forward or you don't focus on where the world is going and creating a place for people to have a place and a say in that, you're technically giving up your right to have an opinion on something that's going to affect you, yours, and those past them regardless.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And the other thing, too, that we have to always bear in mind is that as the world changes, the game never changes. Politics, right? But the people do.
Yeah.
So that's why it's important to remind folks. That's why when I think about in the world of education, right now, this whole thing about critical race theory is such a big hot topic.
Yeah.
1619 Project, right? We have to remind people of what happened.
Yeah. Instead of having the story be changed. Because even when it comes to Martin Luther King, we were taught Martin Luther King in school, but we weren't taught Malcolm X, right? We were taught Malcolm X in the juxtaposition, but not in his actual history. And then our boy Jamil came through, and then you had a partner in crime where it's like, we get to say this louder.
Right. Well, I would push back on that. You weren't even taught Martin Luther King correctly.
You weren't. So you were taught the watered down version.
Right. Right.
Sweet and low.
Exactly. And so what has to happen is we have to expose our young people, our students, to the real deal of history, which sometimes is uncomfortable for all people.
And also realizing the people our age don't know their history correctly too.
Right.
Like, for example, as much as we knew each other, I never heard of the whole Philly bombing. Was that the Philly bombing where there was like, not Black Wall Street, there was like a certain corridor of Philly that was predominantly black.
The move.
Yes.
Move organization.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, I never knew about that.
Yeah.
That's our backyard.
Right.
You feel what I'm saying? Like, we got real relationships with folks on that side. And then like all these other bombing histories, the syphilis situation that happened down in the South, stuff like that. I never heard about any of that until like 25 and after. And I was like, wait, so if all this happened and it's not in history books, to me, that's a word of mouth story.
Right. But and the thing about it is, that's one of the reasons why people like me exist, is to take what people sometimes will say, like you said, word of mouth, and you put it to paper and you do the research and say, okay, this is what we found.
This is the source. This is what was told.
Exactly.
And then after that, is there more research that's done?
Well, there has to be, because so you think about a story like, I wasn't involved in this research, but are you familiar with the story of Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings?
Nah, tell me more.
So Sally Hemings was the enslaved woman. She was actually half sister Thomas Jefferson's wife. He only had one wife. After his wife passed, or when she was dying on her deathbed, she asked him to promise that he would never remarry. And that was to ensure that his wealth passed on to his daughters, not that his daughters wouldn't be exed out or anything by a future marriage and some other children. So he agreed to this, but he later, began a sexual relationship with Sally Hemings, which was his wife's younger half sister, who was also his enslaved property. And so,
Wait, she was his enslaved property?
yes, she was enslaved. Yes.
All right, so she was half black, or?
Yes, she was also half half black, half white. Yes.
Okay, because I remember my dad explained to me that my grandmother was an indentured indentured servant. But the way indentured servitude was back in the day, you were pretty much a slave depending on your situation.
Right,
indentured servant.
Right, and see, Jamaica and the United States, you got two different systems going on also.
Yeah.
But what happens is with Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings is that he actually ended up having more children with her than he did with his wife. He had, I think, about 5 or 6.
Yeah.
That story had been passed down for generations through the Hemings-Jefferson family line. Some of these people today look black, some look white, what have you, but that story had been passed down. And for years, the so-called authorities, universities, the Monticello associations and whatnot, they had denied this. They were like, "Oh no, this couldn't be." Blah blah. Blah. Every reason why.
This couldn't be.
But then
That's always funny.
a little thing called DNA. Exactly. Then a little thing called DNA is now accessible, and people began to prove, wait, this story has validity on a genetic level. And so finally it was accepted. Why is this important to this conversation? It's important to this conversation because the idea was that the Sally Hemings story was really symbolic of the fact that that African Americans have always been intrinsic to and ignored by this broader American narrative.
Yeah.
Okay. So now, and that we're telling, and we are also have the ability to tell truths, right? So now that we have proof that this is what happened on a genetic level, now you have to go back and reassess who Thomas Jefferson was. And you have to reassess who were these people who he was enslaving, who used to be at the footnotes, if anything, of history.
Which means questioning American history.
You're questioning everything. And that doesn't take away from the fact that he was the 3rd president of the United States. What it does do, though, is it adds on layers, not always comfortable layers, but it adds on layers to what makes this country this country. I'm not going to say makes it great again, but this is what makes this country.
Yeah.
Okay. Because now you're dealing with multiple factors. And the interesting thing about it is this story is actually pretty representative, I think, of the relationships that exist between the races in the United States. For so long, because of white supremacy, there's been one narrative shoved at everyone's throat.
Yeah.
African Americans have a story, Asian Americans have a story. Of course, the First Nations peoples have their stories for sure, which really need to be told.
Yeah, correctly.
Everybody has their story, and what it does is it puts some folks.
So, you're an author.
Yes.
Right? Tell me about the business of being an author. Turn your shoulders a little bit.
Okay.
All right, cool. I'm starting again. All right, so you're an author. Tell me about the business of being an author, and why is being an author and writing a book important to you?
I'm glad you asked that question. Where do I begin? The business of being an author, the business of book writing, is something that I had to learn. And I kind of learned it late in my process when it comes to the book, but I like to say that I really took the time to learn it. And what happened was, it was really interesting. It's going to sound crazy, but it's the truth. I wrote my book. I finished that first draft. Period. I was like, I'm done. Wrote the book. I looked at my computer, looked at my bookshelf, and I realized I had no idea how I was going to get this document to I had no idea.
So you wrote the whole book without the business end?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, because I didn't start out intending to write a book. I was writing a research paper, maybe like an article to publish in like a magazine. That's what I'm used to doing. I had never done a book. And
why was it important to get into publishing?
Well, let me say something now. I'll answer that. So what happened was, I was used to being So doing like magazines and stuff like that, I can do that because I write it, I email it, and that's it. Yeah, I've written for a number of Masonic magazines, primarily the Philaxis Journal, a couple of newspaper articles and things of that nature over the years. Well, several.
Does the word Masonic have a meaning?
Well, just meaning that they're focused on the Masonic, fraternity, history and what have you.
Okay.
So I've done that for quite a bit over the years and what have you, and got some praise. Prior to this book coming out, I had my writings featured in some books, but I never had to deal with the business end or editing or any. I just wrote what I wrote, edited a couple times and sent it off to someone, and they did the legwork and the publishing. I was kind of scared. I never touched that. But with this particular writing here, it was so big that I had no choice but to figure out if I was going to write, if I was going to put it in a book, if I was going to self-publish it or what have you. And so to answer your question about the importance of it, I think it's important because it's a great way to it's a great way to not only make money, but it's really a great accomplishment for yourself, regardless of if you're writing history, a memoir, publishing a diary, what have you. It's a really great feeling of accomplishment that I did this. And I remember people looking at me like when I said, I'm writing a book, they're like, sure. But to actually say I did it, it's done, it's out, selling, was really, really big for me.
What's the difference between a writer and an editor?
So a writer, sometimes it can be one and the same, but I don't edit my own stuff. I'm primarily, I will, but I like to have someone else look at it. But the writer, you're the one who's generating the ideas, you're the one putting pen to paper, and the editor actually goes through and makes sure and says, hey, you missed a word here, grammar, and then also, does this make sense? Think about this, think about that. Maybe you should explore this angle. It kind of gives you that second pair of eyes.
Do they look at the beginning of the story and say, hey, if you put this in the middle, this discredits this first paragraph on page 2?
A good editor will do something like that, yeah.
Okay.
A good editor will say, hey, there's some inconsistency. What's going on? Is this a typo? Did you mean to say this? Did you,
Does there need to be trust between you and your editor?
Oh, 1,000%.
Okay.
1,000%, because the thing about it is the editor can come back with all type of suggestions. And if you don't trust them, then you're not going to take their feedback.
Yeah.
They also have to trust you to do the right thing, but you have to have an editor. And I actually had a couple people edit my book. You have to trust what they're saying. And sometimes you're not going to accept what they say. That's okay. But you can't be in a position as a writer, I think, where you're always fighting the editor on every little thing. Because at that point, then it's like, oh, hey, look.
Yeah, why are we even here at this point?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And as an editor, you can't come in and impose your spiel onto it per se, because that may not be, what that writer is going through. So it's kind of, in that regard, it's kind of a team effort.
Do you have to practice setting boundaries?
I hope you don't have to get to that point, but you may. I hope you don't have to. I only had one real kind of back and forth with one of my editors, which was she asked me about the sexuality of some of the characters in my book, and I was like, hey, I'm not talking about sexuality, period.
Yeah.
For anybody. So why would I get into who's gay, who's not gay? That was
kind of like topic. A separate agenda for your research, or for the story itself.
Yeah, I would say it did. It just, like I said, it just wasn't. Not that it may not be important in another book or somewhere else, but it just wasn't what I was talking about. I didn't talk about anybody's sexuality.
And that was the point of your research.
Right. Yeah. So that was the only time I really ever had a back and forth kind of thing with an editor, and that didn't get included. But yeah, that was pretty much it.
Okay. When it came to the process of saving money, putting it towards getting the books printed, and figuring out, hey, how do we sell this product? Were there sacrifices you ever had to make on your own side of things? Or was it like, hey, I got to reach out to a bank and see if I qualify for some things and see what we can do?
Maybe a smarter person went to a bank and got a loan or something of that nature or whatever. I honestly, I wrote the book and I was kind of like feeling my way through the dark.
You were the first one in your friend circle to write a book.
Maybe like friends that you and I would know together, yes. But like I have other people that I know that have done it. But I didn't go into it with a plan thoroughly. Like, I didn't plan on writing a book at first. I would definitely advise someone now, having gone the way I did, if you really have a story or something on your heart, map out your plan.
Okay.
Map out your plan.
Why do they need a plan?
Because, well, I mean, just logistically from a financial side of things, it takes money to make money.
Yeah.
So I had invested about somewhere between $5,000 and $6,000 into this actual project before I ever sold a copy.
Yeah.
You see, now thankfully I made that back in the first month, right? But by the second month I was in a profit space. I'm like, oh, this is great,
Yeah.
But
Was that terrifying for you?
no, no.
I mean, the process itself of leading up to that.
I don't think I really felt the fear. But this is one thing I would say that I think I did pretty good at, which was I knew my market. I knew my story. I knew what I had was good and unique and something that people hadn't seen even from down to the cover, right? I marketed it in a way where I was like, this is going to sell. I know it, and not because I said so, but because I know it's that good. And I know in that regard, I kind of knew what I was doing. So, but you have to have a plan because, I didn't realize how expensive it was going to be when I was really starting to write. I mean, I had to pay, a couple $100s to this historical society for picture rights. There's a couple $100s here for that. So there's some money it took to actually get my ISBN number.
What's that?
The ISBN number is the barcode on the back of a book. Most published books will have an ISBN number, so you can punch it in like on Amazon or what have you, and it'll pop up and say, this is your book.
Okay.
This is the book you're looking for, right? So, and also libraries use that as well for cataloging. So I had to make sure I had my ISBN number. I had to make sure I had all my legal documents together and stuff like that. A copy was sent off to the Library of Congress, right? All of these different things. Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome.
Exactly. So it's on.
Does it have to be sent off to the Library of
It
Congress?
didn't have to be, but it's about
Because of the content.
I had to get it there. Flyers, for when I had events or to pass out to promote the book itself. I have a website, jamesrmorgan.com. You can check that out.
Good plug.
No problem.
Yeah.
And so all those things, these are all things that add up to this project, and of course those costs add up. So you definitely want to map it out.
Yeah.
As far as what it is, and do your research. Talk to people. There's some great websites. I loved self-publishing with Dale, still do. And you really want to talk to some folks about, okay, this is what I want to do. How do I prepare myself for that success, and to do it successfully?
Yeah.
Some of that I did at the time, and some of what I'm saying now I learned from hitting my head. And and another thing too, I'm always big when I'm gonna look in this camera here, for my future authors. If you are an author, especially if you decide to self-publish, which I love self-publishing, please be prepared for tax season. Stay organized with your documents, your finances, and your receipts and stuff, because you will thank me later.
Yeah.
But that's what I mean by preparing for success. I have no problem with sharing the fact that, when this book first came out, I was getting probably about $1,500 every 2 weeks from my 9-to-5 job. And then within a month of book sales, I get $6,500 in book sales.
And that changes your tax bracket.
It changes your tax bracket, but also too, you got to account for that. You know what I mean? So these are all things that I learned by osmosis. Sometimes I sat down and had to read some books or look on videos or what have you. But just again, you want to stay organized, and you do that by having a plan. Put some money to the side, whatever. These are things that I definitely recommend doing.
And Uncle Sam's always going to get his 33%.
Oh yeah, absolutely. No question.
Yeah,
no question.
Where do you find your belief that this book was going to be successful? Because it was research before it was a book. And after telling me about where you find your belief, you still have books left, right? Now, when it comes to the business of sales, there's that excitement of I drop something, people are interested in it, units are moving. And then you get to this point where you start to look at the books and the books start to look back at you, and it's like,
Right.
Oh, I got to get comfortable with this thing just existing and not moving like how it was in the beginning.
Yeah. And for me, that was COVID.
Yeah.
The food was selling fine until COVID hit.
Yeah. And did COVID make it harder for you?
Oh, definitely. I mean, look, I remember. I mean, I was so backed up with. At first, I was really backed up with orders, which was okay. That was a good thing at the time because okay, the money's coming in, but I still got to get the books out. I remember I had this really, really, really big order. Just people had been buying, but I didn't have, because things was backed up because of supply chain and stuff. Yeah. So when books finally did arrive in my house, and I'm like, wow, great, I've got all these books. I got them out in the mail and stuff like that to sign them and everything. Then that's for me afterwards was when that kind of dried up because it was like, oh, now
that's a lot of excitement, that's a lot of buzz, and then just to go cold.
Right.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, we'll go back to the beginning. As far as the successful part and where did that come from? I sat down and looked at the market that I was getting ready to enter. Particularly the topic that I was writing about.
Yeah.
I looked at other books that had been published particularly around that time. My book came out in 2018, so I was looking at books that came out around that time or just prior. What are the things that I liked that other people did? What are the things that I didn't like? And then I also looked at other books that may have not dealt with masonry, but dealt with the Wild West, African American. How did I want to market my book? I wanted my book to be looked at as a good African American history text that focused on Freemasonry and was a biography. So I looked at other biographies, successful ones. What did they do that I liked? What are things that they did that I didn't like, even down to the color scheme? Okay. And so, I did have a good graphic designer at the time that I was working with. And so, so she got me kind of in that mindset of really doing that market research, and she did help in that regard. And I just wanted to put out what I thought was the best, most professional product. Yeah. And I knew it was something that no one else had. And then because I also had enough of a kind of a cultural foothold in that world already, from my own podcasts and YouTube shows, what have you, I said, okay, once I put this out and I say James Morgan is doing this, it's going to sell. Because what I did was I basically made my name the value factor first. Yeah. So even though, and I distinctly remember, I have a friend of mine in North Carolina, and when the book came out, it was $50. So my friend said to me, he said, man, when I saw that price tag, I was like, man, what is James talking about? He's like, I'll pay it because it's you. But, and then he got the book, and because he wasn't expecting it to be as thick as it is. That book is 492 pages. Yep. So when he got it, he said, whoa. I said, okay, but did you feel like you got did you feel like you got the value for your money? He said, absolutely. Everyone says the same thing because it's not like I sold him a book that was 25 pages for $50. That doesn't make sense. But I had looked at other books around that were where people were doing that. There were in terms of that market space where people were, to me, overpricing books or what have you. And it wasn't because they were doing it to be scammers. It was because they hadn't done the market, the research on the business end that I did. Yeah. Right. So even down to, for anyone who's interested in self-publishing, I personally use lulu.com, but there are other sites out there that you can definitely check out to self-publish your book. But do your market research and do what is best for you. Self-publishing is not for everybody. Yeah. Some people, you need to go to a regular publisher to get something done. Self-publishing, I like doing it because you keep what you kill. If I don't move any books, I'm not making any money. However, if I'm willing to go out there and bust my hump and blow my car up and this, that, and third, felt good loading my car with a bunch of books.
Selling it out the trunk.
Selling the trunk, going to Philly, selling it out the trunk and leaving the city with rent money. That felt good, and not having to touch my 9 to 5. You see, so those are the type of things that you have to question yourself. What is the sacrifice that I'm willing to make? Yeah, and then you look at it accordingly. And that's not just with books. That's, I think, with anything. What are you willing to put into it?
Did your family support you in this endeavor?
Oh yeah, absolutely. My brother definitely was supportive, particularly from a financial perspective.
Shout out to him.
Yeah, absolutely. There were a couple of times there. Honestly, that book came out in December of 2018, and I really wanted it to come out by December 1st. It came out December 28th of that month. It would have been later had it not been for my brother actually investing some money into the project at the time when I really needed it to kind of to go.
Yeah.
And so
Was that a mishap on the fun side of things when you were planning originally?
to some degree, it was poor planning, and then also I won't dwell on it, but I had been after a particular organization for the process and the price for some pictures that ended up in the book. Actually, I think one of them is the cover image.
Yeah.
And I have been after this particular organization saying, hey, I'm waiting for a response. And I have been waiting since like July. And then it's like, now it's November, and I get somebody on the phone. And they're like, well, we've got other people in front of you, blah, 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 blah. I said, look, I've been waiting since July, and I'm just trying to find out how much money I gotta pay you guys.
Yeah.
And then they're like, oh, since July? Oh my, I had all these emails, but see, I was organized. I had all my emails and my what have you. I was like, yeah. I said, look, I've been, and I keep getting the runaround. So then they come back and gave me the price, and it's like, it was, several hundreds of dollars I just didn't have. And so, fortunately, my brother was able to, to invest in it in that regard, and I just pay back. Yeah. But on another level, I mean, I would say my family was supportive of, if I said I'm writing a book, they said, okay, go get it done.
Were there ever dark periods in this process? Because there's a big difference between I work my 9 to 5 and we need to push this out the trunk because I don't want to grow up looking at all these books looking at me.
Right.
You feel what I'm saying? Because there are authors who they wrote a book and they still have that first box of books that they thought was going to sell. The people that was like, no, we'll make the purchase, never did. And instead of building up and figuring out what the marketing would be, the value of their relationships, and also respecting the value of what their value is. A lot of people adjust that value, but you stood on the value of $50. What did that value mean to you?
Wow. It meant a lot to me. It meant a lot to me. It meant a lot to me in the perspective of believing in myself.
Yeah.
And investing myself and taking the risk to do so. And, I mean, we talk about dark periods. I mean, I will admit, the graphic designer for the book was at the time, my fiance. We're no longer together, and so there were other issues that in that relationship that occurred. But the book kind of became a source of contention because we're both working on it together. But then the personal becomes the professional, becomes the professional, becomes the personal. So there were issues in that regard. As far as selling it or anything of that nature, I think it debuted, I think, to a lot of success, and like I said, I got 3 awards for it. But it was definitely scary when I first hit that button. I went online and launched. I posted it.
Yeah. And then you waited.
Yeah. And fortunately, I didn't have to wait too long because I started seeing the people going. I mean, I remember the first day my book came out, I think I sold about 75 copies.
Wow. How did that feel?
Amazing. Because I was able to look, and here's the cool thing about it. I was able to, I guess, shout out to Lulu.com for this feature. I was able to go online and look, and when people would purchase it, I could see the email addresses and things, right? And so some of these people are like, oh, I know who that is, I know who that is, I know who that is.
Do them directly.
Exactly. So I can see who has, that's why even to this day, I see some people, I'm like, I know you still haven't bought a book, but it's okay. It's okay.
Not worried about that.
I keep pushing, but to be able to track that, to see and to know, and look, even right now, I still run monthly reports on sales just for my own finances and everything. And even now that the book has been out a few years, it just feels amazing to be able to go back and say, yo, I've sold well over 1,000 copies of a book, which that's not New York Times seller worthy, but it's from somebody who didn't know anybody. And I always said, people ask me how many copies I want to sell. I said, if I sell one copy to somebody I don't know, somebody, a complete stranger somewhere out in Arkansas, somewhere, I feel successful. The book is sold internationally. I've shipped copies to France, Germany, Sweden, England, right? Liberia. They have it in Liberia now.
Okay.
As well.
And I know for you that's a point of pride.
Absolutely. I've spoken to international audiences as well, in the country of Georgia, as well as in Trinidad and Tobago, and England.
The country of Georgia.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, and I've gotten to travel and speak on it as well. So there's also that benefit as well that's occurred for me. I did a West Coast tour last year, up and down California. Last year I went to California and Oklahoma with the book, as well as some local speaking engagements. Just today, as I was on my way over here, I had someone else from California out in Sacramento, a group that wanted me to speak on the book. You know, so I mean, hey, you know, I'm just a kid from Jersey.
Does doing these speaking engagements about your work and the history behind your work, would you say that changes your relationship with the original work?
In what way? What do you mean?
Like, you're already proud of what you're doing, but now you get to see the impact on the people. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely been liberating in some ways, but it's also more pressure.
Okay. Tell me how so.
Because it's liberating in a way because it's like, okay, you know, I went through a job loss situation.
Yeah. And that was scary for you.
But I have something to sell.
Yeah.
So in that way, it's cool. It's liberating because it's like, okay, it does give me some level of financial, you know, and then it's like, I may just be, and there's honestly been days like this where I'm like, oh man, I'm hungry. $300, where'd this come from? Oh, the book. You know, like, you know, so there have been days like that, right? But then on the other hand, is the pressure aspect is, you know, I think anyone who debuts to success with a book or maybe an album or something, the pressure aspect is, can you do it again?
Yeah. I feel like that's the biggest question.
Right. Yeah. So, you know, I am going to publish, you know, another book, but, you know, again, the question is, this one was three awards.
Yeah.
You know,
3 awards.
Yeah.
Do you send in any of those awards back home, or do they just stay with you at the?
Oh no, I have them.
Okay. Do they fuel you, or are they just a representation of your work?
It's a good question. One of them does. One of them specifically does. I shout out to all 3 of them, though. but the Dr. Charles H. Wesley Award, that was the first one that I received.
Yeah.
And that meant a lot to me because Dr. Charles H. Wesley was a Mason himself. He was actually a member of one of the lodges here in D.C.
Okay.
He teacher Howard Abetta. And was president of Central State University and taught at Wilberforce as well.
Okay.
Also a president of Alpha Phi Alpha Fraternity Incorporated and wrote the history book for Alpha. Dr. Wesley is kind of one of my idols in the historical world, if you will. You know, unfortunately, he's passed on, but he's somebody who I kind of try to pattern myself after in certain ways.
Okay.
And to win the award that's named for him, right? That really meant a lot to me. And now that, at the time when I wrote the book, I was not an alpha.
Yeah.
So now that I am one, I'm
just recently grown.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, thank you. I'm a member of the same chapter that Dr. Wesley was a member of. That he started. He was a charter member of Mu Lambda chapter of Alpha Alpha Fraternity Incorporated. So to be in the same chapter as him and to have had an award, again, that torch, right? There's a certain torch that's been passed on that I feel like now I'm carrying in a certain way that I have to carry forward because I'm trying to walk in the footsteps. I'm not related to Dr. Wesley, but I am related to Dr. Wesley, if that makes sense. So that in that regard, you know, that does fuel me because I feel like I have to be an ambassador of truth telling and storytelling.
When there was a part you brought up about your old relationships that I wanted to ask.
Sure.
Is there any fear with letting someone who's involved with you intimately work on a product like this, like down the road, like royalties, people owed money? Does that ever come up, or is it just like, no, I took care of the business end, so I don't need to worry about that?
At the time, there was not. Now, I would say there is not necessarily about money, but more so about the relationships themselves.
Okay.
Because what happens is, if you're working with somebody who you have a romantic relationship or some other type of relationship, who we are as people times may not be who we are professionally. Okay. And what I mean by that is, you may be a great professional, I may be a great professional, but we may not work well together.
Yeah.
It's not that anyone's stealing or anything crazy going on. It's just we may not work good together, but we're the best of friends.
Yeah.
Right? This is like you can't live with everybody. Okay. If I got some really, really, really good friends of mine that I could never be roommates with.
Yeah.
Because of the lifestyle that they lead versus the lifestyle that I lead.
Yeah.
And so it doesn't make them bad people, doesn't mean we can't be friends, but that's just not the nature of the relationship.
Yeah.
And so to answer your question, going forward, there's definitely an aspect of appreciation, but also an aspect of, in the future, would I want a relationship damaged at the cost of financial success or what have you? And I wouldn't want that. So I tend to want to keep those type of things separate. However, if someone has something that can contribute, by all means, but I wouldn't want to be in a position where I feel like that's the work, that the common work that we're doing is the center of contention.
Yeah. Also, the world's a big place and there's a lot of talent out there. Absolutely. So that's not the only place to get what you need done.
Right.
And then on the other side of this, I remember this was a discussion we had, copycats. So folks who are like making these stories, books, of course, and you get text messages, someone reaches out to you and says, hey, have you seen so-and-so's work?
Right.
When you come across people who technically are copying your work or making work that's adjacent to your work, word for word, bar for bar, how do you handle that emotionally before handling that critically?
So again, that goes back, I think, to being prepared for success. So if you have, in the terms of books, if you have your copyright and everything situated, when you see certain things out there, you go, wait a minute, and I'm not a lawyer, but there are processes for that.
That's where the cease and desist comes in.
Exactly, yeah. If you see plagiarism or something like that, but you have to, but again, you have to educate yourself so you can protect yourself. You have to learn I'm not a lawyer, but I did read up on copyright, to understand how that process works. What am I protected for and against, right? In the case of books, there is a certain time period where a book can be called public domain. How long is that for? What happens, there is a document somewhere that says, okay, if I die, this is what's going to happen with my book residuals whenever they're generated. This is where the address to send them to, and the person for them to be made payable to. So these are the type of things that, that we have to do in order to protect ourselves. But again, you have to be educated. You have to educate yourself so you can protect yourself from those type of things.
What were the 5 things that you had to do to protect your intellectual property?
Oh, wow. Well, like I said, definitely securing copyright and the ISBN number is very important, for sure.
Take your time, man. Take your time.
Sorry.
You good? Take your time.
Being original.
Okay.
Probably number one. Being original, knowing that I know I didn't try anyone else's stuff.
Yeah.
So being original was definitely crucial. Making sure that I still do retain attorneys and whatnot. So if I do have any issues in that regard, I have people I can reach out to.
Yeah.
And for those type of things.
We get it done.
Yeah, exactly. And then also again, and educating yourself. It's great to have a lawyer, but I like to read up on things too. Or look at some videos or other cases or things. It just kind of depends.
Comparative works.
Right.
Yeah.
Because even you could hire a good lawyer, hire a good accountant, good tax accountant.
Yeah.
Great tax accountant.
Yeah.
But also having a basic understanding of what's going on around you for yourself is important. So that way you know who's a good person around you, who's a bad person, whether it's a lawyer or what have you. And then kind of just going from there.
Okay. Now you've written books,
yes.
You've traveled, and you've done a lot of speaking engagements. What's one thing in relation to this work that you say you benefited from that you didn't see coming?
I would say I would say it's travel.
Mm-hmm.
Traveling and being able to speak to different audiences
Yeah.
has definitely been because, I wrote a book about African American history.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'll be somewhere I'm speaking to an all-white audience, or an almost all-white audience, and they paid me to come out there, bought me a airline ticket.
Does that have a different feel to it?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely, because the speaking to a black audience, there's a certain level of knowledge base that's already there
Yeah.
that the white audience doesn't. I can't assume that the white audience has, right? And so that part has been interesting to me, and I think I've benefited because it puts me in conversation with people. Oh, excuse me.
Yeah, take your time. Take your time.
I'm so sorry.
No, it's cool.
I'm so sorry.
We had 2 hours, but
It puts me in conversation with people who I otherwise would not have been in conversation with about some very intimate topics, not just masonry, but race relations in America.
Yeah.
Sometimes, we go out to eat afterwards, or, maybe they have a meal prepared.
prepare for those side discussions is never easy.
Right.
Yeah.
And so being able to sit down and hold conversation and really kind of hold court in a way, right, with these people and say, okay, this is why I wrote this, and especially if someone's read the book already or something, they've got some really good questions. So
some strong opinions.
or some strong opinions, yeah, and that's fine too.
Yeah.
That's fine too. But I always say, don't argue me, argue with my sources.
Yeah.
If you have a problem with me, we can talk about it. But if you have a problem with the book, look at the source and then look at your source.
Yeah.
Let's have a conversation.
Yeah. Because the discussion starts and stops with the sources.
Right.
All right, so this is going to be my last question before we wrap it up.
All right.
And I think for me, when it comes to you, it's an important question. Has this process been lonely for you? And the reason I ask that is the success, we imagine as kids what success would look like. Like the first time we met, you beat the hell out of me in Smash Bros. Was it Smash Bros?
Soul Calibur. I still remember this day. Soul Calibur.
Yeah, over at Essex Catholic.
Yes. Yep.
That's where we were supposed to go to school.
Right.
Well, we wanted to go to school, but we ended up going over to Maris High, right? And since then, we've been friends, and we've exchanged a lot of stories.
Wait. I'm sorry. Can I cut you off real quick?
No,
I gotta give a shout out to you for one thing. One of the reasons why we became friends, if you remember, is because I was beating everybody on Soul Calibur, and I would beat people, they would quit. You kept coming back. That's why we became friends, because you kept coming back and kept getting whooped.
Yo, let me tell you something, man. Most folks who quit, there's nothing wrong with quitting.
Right.
I don't think there's anything wrong with quitting. I think there's something wrong if you haven't given yourself the opportunity to understand why you're not accomplishing the thing you think you can.
Right.
And the only way to do that is sometimes to put yourself in a position where it's not about winning. It's about figuring out what winning looks like and understanding, do you fit that mold? Are you going to make time for that mold? Or are you just here to have fun?
Right.
I used to be vicious at video games, but as you know, when I got into high school and I started football, I gave up video games because I was like, I knew capacity wise, I wouldn't be able to focus on school, video games. And I never considered myself popular, but I would say I was always very well known. And there's a certain amount of sensitivity with being well known.
Right.
And I was like, if I can't apply myself correctly, then like, might as well hang it up. So like with you, being friends with you was easy because like, I enjoyed being friends with people who aren't going to change just because the room doesn't support whatever they're talking about.
Right.
You feel what I'm saying? Like, you do have to have a certain amount of backbone to be like who you need to be for yourself. And as kids, it's very easy to conform to what's going on until you think it's safe to be you.
Right.
But for us, we've always been like, we're going to push against the waves because there's something in the ocean that we got to find.
Right.
And if we decide to share it, cool. And if not, it doesn't matter. And also, you got a great family. You know, I always love your family, mom, dad, you know, I don't think it's always about like, oh, the perfect family, marriage, all this other stuff. I think it's about, hey, do people make time to care for each other?
Right.
You feel what I'm saying? So like, you know, getting my ass kicked in a game was worth it because we still friends.
Same.
You feel what I'm saying? And if we weren't friends, I'd still treasure the moments we had together when we were friends. And that's what's important.
Right. Right.
So,
Absolutely.
yeah. Appreciate the shout out. I never thought about it that way. I was just like, look, I'm not going to get murked like this.
So the lesson in this one, just keep coming back. No matter how many times you get beaten Soul Calibur and Green Cast, keep fighting.
But has this process been lonely for you? Because like success isn't linear. It's not a straight line of you get the money from around our way, you get the bitches. It's not that. It's everyone defines success differently, and making money isn't always the success. So, you know, for me, I'm big on impact.
Right.
I've done a lot of work. Getting 220 people into therapy wasn't easy, but the goal wasn't to get 220 people into therapy. The goal was to share resources and give the community something we could tell they were very desperate for, and no one was providing it correctly.
Right.
And now that I'm here, creating opportunities for folks like you to tell your story and see how that relates to mental health, plus you giving people lessons on writing a book, the business, and doing stuff correctly, I think that's the blessing. Because like your story needs to be heard of, hey, selling 1,000 copies out of your trunk, yourself eating what you killed, that's important. But also reiterating, hey, if I failed, I would have known what failure looks like, and I would have had to learn from that.
Yeah,
so like, yeah.
To answer your question, yes, there were some lonely parts, lonely nights, lonely days. You know, I think the good thing for me was I always had my co-researcher, Miss Swanigan, there every step of the way, and you know, so she was around in that regard, but you know, we weren't physically in presence of each other.
Yeah.
You know, definitely being a person, especially dealing with history and kind of correcting a narrative. Like, I know the truth. Like, imagine being a person and you're the only one in the room that actually knows what really happened.
Yeah.
And so everyone else is reading or believing the falsehood. That's what they have access to.
Moving according to that, because that does affect their actions.
Right. So even if I'm just on social media with some guys and I'm saying, well, you know, that's not really what really happened, or I got some of his stuff, I can't tell you everything yet, but I got some stuff that's gonna, right? Everyone looking at you like, heck is he talking about?
Yeah.
That was lonely. It was, because I'm looking at this. You're arguing about you're arguing, okay, 2 + 5 is 7, and then this guy over here is arguing, well, no, 6 + 1 is 7, and then this guy over here is saying, well, 7 times 0 is 7, and I'm the only one in the whole room that says, y'all all right.
Yeah.
7 is the answer,
and everyone disagrees with you.
and everyone's looking at me like, what is he talking about? Because they're more focused on minutia than on the actual solution, right?
What's minutia?
Minutia meaning things that don't matter, right? So you're looking at these little points of, because you have different equations, but you're not focusing on the fact or appreciating the fact that you're all getting to the same answer, which is 7.
Yeah.
Okay. It takes someone who understands mathematics at a little higher level to recognize that fact, that it's saying the same thing different ways.
Yeah.
Okay. And so it was lonely. It was lonely in that regard. It was lonely when I had people who didn't necessarily think I was going to complete it. It's lonely, honestly, especially when it first came out. And, you know, there were some people who chose not to buy the book, and that's okay. But when you come to me and tell me why, like I had somebody tell me that that they thought my book was overpriced. But they didn't actually buy it or read it. They're like, I'm not spending $50 on a book.
Yeah.
You know, you should lower your price and stuff. You know, there is that self-doubt part where you're like, well, maybe did I just be wrong? But then that's when the ego has to step in and say, no, I did my research. I know what my overhead cost is.
Yeah.
This book is priced accordingly. This book, like, I know what's in there. And the people who have bought it, no one has ever come back and said, oh man, this book was crap. This was this was that. Everyone who's bought it and who actually read it was very impressed and very satisfied. And, you know, but in the early stages, there is a loneliness feeling of, you know, even when I turned it in for certain awards and things and said, hey, you know, I want y'all to consider this book, there is a loneliness of, well, maybe they won't see what I see. Maybe they won't, you know, think it's all that. But then the reward comes in, not just from financial sales.
Yeah.
The reward comes in when I remember when I got the Phyllis Bleedley Award. Got an email. And you know, you get an email and you kind of see it, but you don't have time or you ignore it.
It doesn't register.
Yeah, it doesn't register.
Yeah.
I ignored the email for like a day or two because I saw it was something from this group, and I was like,
Yeah.
I was like, oh, they just want me to do something. Like I didn't think it was anything. I wasn't thinking about the award. And then when I finally read it, it was like, congratulations, you've won this. We're trying to reach you. So I'm like, I remember I screamed. I was in my office and I screamed. I was like, oh my God, like what in the world? You know, and that was a blessing to say, okay, this, and I didn't apply for that award either.
Yeah.
By the way. So to be able to get that type of recognition, it made it all worth it.
At some point, you're about to finish.
I was just gonna say it made it all worth it because those are things that no one can take away from me. Those are experiences. Those are, those awards are sitting here at my house right now. And no one day when I have grandchildren or something or what have you, I want them to see that and say, oh wow, he really. He got it in with that typewriter with that typewriter. He got it in with that keyboard.
Classic.
Yeah.
If there's one suggestion I can make, and I also want to hear your opinion on this.
Sure.
And then you can tell the folks where they can find you and everything else, and how you'd want to be contacted if so.
Sure.
Have you ever thought about releasing your work in a public library after it's had its run?
Well, it is in the DC libraries. I put copies there. As far as more widely, yes, it's definitely something that can go in there as well.
Yeah.
And
outside of DC, like
oh yeah, absolutely. It's definitely something that can go all over because now I want it to be there because I think it's important, and because our narratives have to be told, and I recognize. A book about Black Freemasonry in the Wild West may or may not be something that people are interested in, but it should be still in the catalog.
Technically, people make movies off stuff like that.
Right.
Like, what's the name of that movie that Jonathan Majors was in on Netflix?
The Harder They Fall. When that movie came out, everybody, that was actually a good period for me when the movie came out, because that allowed me to go back and say, from a marketing perspective, hey, this is a fictitious story about some real people, but fictitious story.
Yeah.
Come read a real story about blacks in the Wild West, right?
It benefited.
It benefited.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Lined up with the market, gotta let you go.
Right.
Gotta let you go. Yeah. So where can the people find you?
I'm on Facebook. I'm on Instagram, Mastermind357. Also on Twitter, Mastermind357. 3579 on Twitter. You can just hit me up. The website is jamesrmorgan.com. You can always go there to get a copy of the book. Also, I have signed copies available. So again, that's jamesrmorgan.com, where you can find me on all the social things. And I'm out here. We're out here.
When it comes to speaking engagements, do you have any requirements, or you negotiate that in the emails?
I typically negotiate it, or have it just kind of, it really kind of depends on proximity to, if it's something that's local to the DMV area versus if it's somewhere that I have to drive to, or if it's somewhere like overnight or flight or anything like that, kind of depends on that. Okay. But just remember, yesterday's price is not today's price. Today's price might not be tomorrow's price. So as
it should be.
Right.
All right, well, appreciate you coming out, man. Thank you for making time.
Yes, sir.
Looking forward to my book.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right, this has been another episode of Mental Health Monday. Peace.
Oh, subscribe, share, like, follow, all that other stuff. I gotta start practice saying that. Anyway,
thanks for coming through. See you guys later.
Bye.
Peace.
All right.
So if you're about to pick a flower, I suggest that you keep this in mind. mind. Happiness comes right from within, so take a breath and take your time. Not